Uh, so welcome everybody. Welcome to the CoreX legal webinar. Today we're talking about AI, the mystery topic of the day, except it's on every headline, and we're going to be talking about that for the next hour or so. Just so you know what's going on, everybody's been muted. We will certainly be open to questions at the end. We've blocked off a good chunk of time for questions. During the program, if you have questions, throw them in the chat. I'll be checking out the chat, and if it seems to fit, I will break in on Brent and ask those questions if they fit there. If not, we'll do them at the end. We are recording this. Everybody will get a copy of this, and if there comes a time when we're having actual questions from you, that's when you can unmute. Just also make a note of two things. As I said in the initial invitation, this is a series. The next program, you'll hear about it, but the next program is Thursday, August 10th, same time at noon, with Brent Britton, of course, and also Scott Kelly from Black Dog Venture Partners. They're going to be talking about raising money. Do's, don'ts, tips, trips, all those things. So if you've ever thought about raising money, work with folks raising money, or you want to raise money, that is a must attend event. And that again is August 10th at the same time, noon. And the other piece is, as the end of the day, everybody who's registered will get a super brief survey, like 2 or 3 questions, just to say, hey, what worked, what didn't, and also like what topics do you want to make sure we cover in the coming weeks and months. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brent and to enlighten us all on AI.
Thank you, Jeff. Hi, everyone. I'm Brent Britton. If you don't know me, I'm the founder and chairman of CoreX Legal, technology law firm here in Tampa. Jeff, of course, the CEO of the firm. And we are a full service, mostly full service technology law firm. We don't do a lot of dispute resolution anymore, but we do handle all the transactionals, all the contracts, all the intellectual property. So today's talk is artificial intelligence, some things the law has to say. One of our dear friends, Tom Stanton here in Tampa, another lawyer, gave a talk on artificial intelligence a week or two ago, which I was supposed to attend but couldn't due to a conflict. And I asked him for his slides, and he was, yeah, I'll get them to you, because I was totally going to crib his presentation, but I never got his slides, so I had to write one of my own. So this is a bespoke original presentation on artificial intelligence. So yeah, we would start off with this sort of boring, what the law has to say about artificial intelligence. But those of you who know me know that boring is not really my thing. So I'd rather call the talk, let's get here, Turing's Revenge: How to Use or Tolerate AI in Your Company Without Getting Sued or Arrested. And I will expand on the meaning of Turing's Revenge momentarily. But just to dive right into it, let me tell you just a little bit about why I'm qualified to give this presentation. Number one, I've been involved in AI in some capacity for 40 years or more. I started working with it in college as an undergrad in the mid to late 80s. Wrote some of my first programs ever in the Lisp programming language, which was a popular language for AI back then. I actually went to MIT and studied AI under Marvin Minsky, who was one of the fathers of artificial intelligence. And I did okay, but it was my only B in my whole time at MIT. So take that for what it's worth. And finally, I've been practicing law for 30 years in the tech space, and we have, if there's a client out there that's doing something in AI, we probably know about them or work for them. So we're pretty much up to speed on what's going on in the world of AI, and really consider ourselves sort of armchair scholars in the space. So okay, so that's why I'm here and why you should listen. All right. I asked an iPhone app called Draw Things the following prompt: I want a black and white film noir realistic photograph of Alan Turing as an evil villain hell-bent on the destruction of civilization. And this is what I got. So okay, that's a good response, right? That kind of looks like Alan Turing, and definitely looks pretty evil, but it didn't seem evil villain enough to me. So I said, I want a black and white film noir realistic photograph of Alan Turing as an evil villain hell-bent on the destruction of civilization as he laughs maniacally. And it created this, which is really, really disturbing and is going to give me nightmares. All right, so what's going on here? The real Alan Turing. This is the real Alan Turing. He was a British mathematician, born in 1912, died in 1954. Alan Turing basically won World War II for the Allies by analyzing the British codes, developing a computing device to de-encrypt the British communications, and thereby feeding British intelligence, German intelligence. I'm sorry, yes, German messages were decrypted and fed to the British so that they could use them strategically to win the war. If you haven't seen the movie, what's it called? The Imagination Game. I'll get to it in a minute, actually. Benedict Cumberbatch plays Alan Turing in the movie. So he was a brilliant mathematician. He's generally credited as the father of theoretical computer science. He invented something called the Turing machine, which basically invented the concept of reading and writing data to memory, following instructions stored in memory. And pretty much every computer, every von Neumann machine, every digital computer today that's not a quantum computer is effectively a very elaborate Turing machine. And we have Alan Turing to thank for the genesis of the ideas that have led to everything we know and love. And of course, he invented the imitation game, which we also call the Turing test. I want to put a pin in that for a minute because we'll get back to the Turing test momentarily. But I want to visit the issue of why Turing's revenge. Alan Turing was convicted of being a homosexual in 1952, which was illegal in the United Kingdom in 1952. And he chose as his punishment chemical castration hormone therapy as an alternative to prison. And so he took hormones designed to make him less homosexual, apparently. And he committed suicide in 1954. And what an enormous loss to the world is Alan Turing's suicide, and what an amazing contribution could he have made to society and civilization had he lived. I don't care how woke you are or unwoke you are, you can in no way endorse the death of Alan Turing at the hands of his country, effectively. And so it's a great tragedy. And the good news is people began to wake up over the past few years and recognize that this was a horrible tragedy, that literally the father of computing was, convicted of being gay and killed himself. And so he's been dramatically rehabilitated over the past few years. In 2019, a BBC program awarded him posthumously, obviously, the greatest person of the 20th century. The Bank of England has put Turing's face on the 50-pound note. And I think it's safe to say that he is now universally regarded as the celebrity that he deserves to be, and indeed deserved all along. So let's get back to the Turing test. What is the Turing test? So Alan Turing posed the question, I propose to consider the question, can machines think? How do you know if a machine is thinking? How do you know if a machine is intelligent? And what he decided was that if you're getting messages from a computer and you're getting messages from a human, and you can't tell the difference, if you're communicating with each of these things, a computer and a human, and you can't tell the difference between the computer and the human, then the computer has passed the Turing test. It doesn't really matter what's going on under the hood. If you think it's intelligent, then it's intelligent by any reasonable definition. So again, Turing basically invented the concept of artificial intelligence with the Turing machine back in the 1950, actually. And ever since then, the field has moved in fits and starts. As I say, I've been involved in AI since the 1980s, and real artificial intelligence that passed the Turing test has always been 5 or maybe 10 years away, for the past 50 years, basically. 70 years, if you go all the way back to Alan Turing. So why is that? It's hard to understand, but basically what it comes down to is that we humans have a hard time calling a machine intelligent. Even the name artificial intelligence is a bit of a misnomer, because there really is no intelligence there. But again, if it passes the Turing test, then we've decided that we'll call it intelligent. So when artificial intelligence was able to move a robotic arm to move blocks around, we said, well, that's not intelligent. That's just raw computing power. And when artificial intelligence, Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov as a world grandmaster at chess, we said, well, that's not intelligent. That's just raw computing power. And when we got optical computer character scanning and it could read documents and figure out what they're saying, we said, well, that's not intelligent. And when it won on Jeopardy, when IBM Watson won on Jeopardy, we said, that's not intelligent, it's just raw computing power. But what happened over the past few years is that a number of efforts have been made to create what are called large language models. And one of them, to great hype, I mean, the hype curve on ChatGPT is probably steeper than any other thing that's ever been introduced ever. It had over 1 million users 5 days after it was launched. Today, it's well over 100 million users. What happened was, in November of 2022, I say the Turing test was more or less passed, because you could have a conversation with ChatGPT that pretty much, with exceptions, but pretty much emulates a conversation with a human. Now, we've all gotten to know ChatGPT's style, if you've been using it, and particular diction and the way it articulates concepts. And so I suspect that many of us who've been using ChatGPT for some time can tell the difference between whether it is talking versus a human, if the timing were right and all that. But fact of the matter is, I claim that the Turing test was pretty much passed more or less last November. And now we've got it. Now we've got a more or less general purpose artificial intelligence at our disposal. I will tell you this, I have a friend named Hugh Loebner, and Hugh, many years ago, endowed something called the Hugh Loebner Turing Test Prize, under which $25,000 will be awarded to a computer program that can emulate a human with text only, and $100,000 will be awarded to any system that can read and understand audiovisual, multimedia presentations and communicate back and summarize them, whatnot, as a human. These prizes still have not been awarded yet. Numerous smaller prizes have been awarded by the Loebner Foundation, but not, so if there is a sort of standard determination of whether the Turing test has been passed, you see Hugh Loebner says we're not there yet, for what that's worth. But so if you're completely naive to the space and you haven't been playing with any of the toys, let's talk about what's going on, and what is actually out there, what's been released, and what it can do. So here are some things. So introducing the large language model. A large language model is basically a description of all the concepts in the model in a large piece of text. All right. So these are the participants in the space. The company called OpenAI has released a number of products, most famously ChatGPT. Google has released Bard, which is based on Palm 2, or Lambda, which again, these are all these acronyms refer to. You see L's and M's because we're all talking about large language models. Bing released something called Prometheus and is doing search on Bing, but that's actually backed by GPT-4. And of course, Meta, to great acclaim, more or less yesterday, released Llama 2, which is being touted as a really incredible large language model. So these are some of the products that are out there. Some of them are free, and some of them you can pay, and you can get extra services if you pay. And I invite you to go explore all of these if you haven't, to see which may be worth your time and effort. Okay, how does the AI know stuff? All right, so the AI is trained on the existing corpus of data, like all the data. Okay, so all of these large language models have basically read everything on the internet. Everything that's publicly available. Now, of course, there's a really big question which will come up during the legal analysis in a few minutes, which is, if I put something on the internet, does that mean you can just read it and copy it and make use of it? And the answer is generally no. I mean, you can download it in your browser and you can read it, like any other internet user would. But does that mean you can modify it? Can you use it for other purposes? The answer to that is not necessarily. And sometimes the things that we post on the internet come with licensing constraints. Maybe you posted it on an open source site, which has requirements for how it's used and other places. So these large language models have largely gone out and read everything on the internet. There's some human intervention to keep out, bad stuff like basically porn, but also other stuff, more sensitive stuff, hate speech. They generally do their best to try to filter against, things that are unkind and indecent and whatnot. And so the way that AI works is it's first of all, it's extremely complicated, but there's a number of neural networks that crunch on these lexical concepts, this sort of ontology of language, if you will, and they create as I say, an ontology of concepts that's a lot like a very sophisticated form of autocomplete on your phone or on your Google or on your browser. And that's really what's going on with all of this generative AI is there's this really sophisticated ability for the AI to just sort of complete concepts and put words in where that makes sense to do so. Generative AI has the ability to create new works on request based on its so-called knowledge, or at least review or its data of all the data that came before it. Generative AI can create stories, poems, analyses, visuals, proposals, whole websites, software, the list goes on and on. And so it's really quite miraculous. If you haven't dabbled in it yet, I highly recommend that you do, and you're probably going to want to see some examples. So let's get to some interesting examples of AI. I asked a program called DALL-E, which generates visual works. I said, I want a picture of Alan Turing as an evil villain hell-bent on destruction of civilization, photorealistic, laughing maniacally, which, as you may recall, is what I asked another program called Draw Me or Draw Things for the top of the talk. And this is what DALL-E gave, which are all very sort of interesting. But again, remember, these are original works that the AI has created out of nothing, knowing the concept of Alan Turing and probably having access to photographs of him, knowing the concept, I use the word knowing loosely, all right, villain, hell-bent on destruction, photorealistic, laughing maniacally, okay? So you can see sometimes it misses the mark, sometimes it hits the mark, but, a pretty good job. And in fact, probably, as on par with a decent illustrator, a decent human illustrator. If I asked somebody to give me some examples of something like this, I might get something more or less on par with this in terms of quality. Those of you artists out there who disagree, I have nothing but respect for you. What I asked ChatGPT, I said, write a short story in the style of Stephen King about what the world would be like if Alan Turing did not commit suicide. And of course, it did. Now, I'm not going to read this. You can skim through it. I'll tell you a couple things. It is accurate. Okay, it's a nifty story, and it goes on for several more paragraphs about what the world might be like if Alan Turing was still alive. But it's not really in Stephen King's voice, I'll tell you. It kind of missed the mark with respect to coming back at us with an actual Stephen King type scary story. So as I say, sometimes it's hit, sometimes it's missed. But again, the miracle here, and the reason that it moves me to suggest that we're getting very close to actually passing the Turing test, is because this is all original stuff. This is all works that came out of the AI based on what it read, certainly, but this is pretty nifty when you think about it. I mean, this text came from a computer. So okay, here's another example. What I asked DALL-E. Give me a baseball pitcher throwing a fastball in the style of a Stephen King novel. And this is what I got. So you can see we got kind of a zombie there. The threads of the baseball look like they might be earthworms. And I think this is a damn good result for the AI to have created in response to that prompt. Finally, or maybe not finally, I asked GPT, compose a proposal for legal services from a law firm to a technology startup company in the form of a 3-stanza poem in the style of Maya Angelou. And this is what it gave me. In the realm of innovation's embrace, where technology's wonders interlace, a startup soars with dreams to chase. With legal might, we stand as one in the dance of justice. We've begun to shield your vision like the sun. In contracts web, we'll deftly spin, protect your rights, let trust begin. Together, success will surely win. Okay, I don't know. I don't think that lives up to Maya Angelou's standards, but it's a pretty nifty 3-stanza poem. And again, it's pretty miraculous to me that a computer did that in about 5 seconds. Finally, I want to show you some other things that are possible. My pal Joel Freeman runs an AI video company. He's in the audience today. And he asked ChatGPT, Lens AI, and Descript some questions. And this is what he got. Let's see if I can get to it here. Yes, right there. I don't know if you can see this. I'll amp it up a little bit, but he asked ChatGPT, give me 15 topics for videos to promote a video production company. And it did. It gave him 15 topics, some of which are a video case study that highlights a successful project the company completed for a client, showcasing the company's problem-solving skills and creativity. Great idea, ChatGPT. The next thing we asked is, we've got a script here. The ChatGPT came up with the script, and then we said, rewrite it in the style of Clayton Makepeace, and it did. So we've got this great script, okay? And then we fed the AI some pictures of Mark, and you can see what Mark looks like. And then we said, hey, Lensa AI, create a new avatar that sort of looks like Mark, and put him in the video, and then put all this together and actually make the video. And this is what came out.
Listen up, folks. When it comes to video production, you can't skip the first step. It's the foundation upon which your entire project rests. That concept, that big idea you have.
Just want to make sure, Jeff, if you can hear that correctly, nod your head. Yep, good. Okay, I'll continue.
At the beginning is what sets you apart from the rest. It's what gets your audience hooked. Without a strong concept, you're just another video lost in the sea of mediocrity. But with it, you have the power to captivate your audience and leave them wanting more. So don't be lazy, folks. Take the time to develop a concept that truly resonates with your audience.
All right, so you can get where I am here, I think, and that is damn impressed with what AI can do. And so it's going to be used. It's going to be deployed. You're going to use it in your company. People are going to use it in your company. It's going to make your life better, stronger, faster, more efficient. It's here, and it's here to stay. And it's going to get better and better by the day, frankly. I mean, that's the pace at which innovation is happening in AI. As I say, the user base has grown exponentially. I think it took Facebook 4 or 5 years to reach 100 million users, and it took ChatGPT 4 or 5 months. Actually, maybe more like 60. Well, anyway. All right. So obviously, any new thing gives rise to potential legal issues, and that is very true with respect to AI. Every now and then, there's this great organization here in Florida called the Florida Dance Educators Association, and they asked me to come speak. And so I speak, but they want me to talk about dance law, and my response is, OMG, seriously, because there is none. There's one version of the provision of the copyright law that says that choreography is protectable and ownable, but that's it. Okay, right? Like, so I want to be a dance lawyer. I'm sorry, dance lawyer is not a thing. So I have very little to say to the Dance Educators Association of Florida. So I end up telling a lot of jokes, and we have a really good time. But that is not the case with the legal landscape for AI. There's actually a lot of legal issues that AI gives rise to, and I can see one of them mentioned in the comments. By the way, it's Joel Friedman, not Mark. I sincerely apologize, Joel. For some reason I had Mark Friedman on my brain, but the guy who did the video that I just told you about is Joel Friedman. Dear dear friend of mine. So anyway, let's talk about the law. Okay, the big thing that comes up is copyright infringement. So just generally, before we even get to AI, you commit a copyright infringement if you copy a copyrighted work. Okay, you take a digital picture, you make a copy of it. You take an MP3 song, you make a copy of it. You take a book, you put it on a photocopier. That's a copy. That's a copyright infringement. Okay, pretty straightforward. But you also commit a copyright infringement if you have access to a copyrighted work and then produce a substantially similar work. Okay, so if I read your book, let's call it, oh, I don't know, Romeo and Juliet, and then I produce a substantially similar work, let's call it, oh, I don't know, West Side Story. It is possible that the author of Romeo and Juliet could have brought a copyright infringement claim against the author of West Side Story. Now, that's not the best example, because even though they're very similar stories, I don't know that they're substantially similar, but that's one of the issues here in the copyright analysis, is there are very few bright and predictable lines. Is West Side Story substantially similar to Romeo and Juliet, or is it just the same trunk of the tree with very different branches and very different ornaments? And the unpredictability of the answer to that question is something I want you to remain mindful of, because you can go to your lawyer and you can say, well, I've had access to this thing and I produced this other thing, which is kind of like it. Is it a copyright infringement? And it's very, very difficult for any lawyer to give you rock solid guidance on what a judge or jury might decide with respect to whether your second work is substantially similar to the original work. But you'll remember that I said earlier in the talk that the AI, and this is true of pretty much all of them, have been trained on everything. Okay, they have basically read the entire internet with some exceptions and deletions and filtration. So it is entirely possible that everything generated by an AI is infringing someone's copyright. Okay, because again, if I have access to the work and I produce a substantially similar work, I have committed a copyright infringement. So let's look into that. Some cases have been filed. One of the first ones was back in November of 2022, where a bunch of people who store their code on GitHub decided that the GitHub tool that does autocompletion, when you're writing code, you use GitHub to write software. You're writing the software, and as you type along, GitHub will suggest, do some auto-completion suggestions for you. And not only that, but once ChatGPT got involved, they could do entire programs. And the people who authored the original corpus of content at GitHub have filed a massive lawsuit against, as you can see, Microsoft, OpenAI, and all of them for the copyright infringement. Because if you write code using these tools, the complaint says, you are inherently copying the code that was originally in the GitHub database. So this is a big case, and it's not going away, and we're going to have to see how that plays out. There are a lot of questions associated with a case like this. As I said, it's very difficult and very blurry, the line between what is a copyright infringement and what isn't. Is the resulting code a literal copy of the original code, or is it just substantially similar? Are there fair use issues? Is it possible that when somebody posts software on a place like GitHub, they're giving up their right to prevent copyright infringement? Because after all, they're part of the whole point of GitHub is to share your code with others. So these questions need to be answered, and we don't have the answers to them right now. And we're going to watch this case very carefully and see how it plays out. As a lawyer, our job is, of course, to give you the best advice we can and give you the rules, tell you what the rules are. Sign says 55, you don't go 56, or you're breaking the law, breaking the rules. We don't have a lot of bright lines with AI right now. Okay, we're waiting for judges to tell us what the rules are. So we will see as these cases unfold. Here's another complaint that was filed recently. You may have heard of this one. Sarah Silverman, the comedian, apparently wrote a book several years ago. And she discovered that if you go to OpenAI, if you go to ChatGPT and you ask for a summary of her book, it will give you one. And generally, summarizing books doesn't rise to the level of a copyright infringement. I will tell you that there is a seminal case, however, in this space where The book in question was President Ford's memoirs, President Gerald Ford's memoirs from his time in office. And the Washington Post, I believe, had printed 2 paragraphs from the book in its review of the book. So you can always copy things to review them. That's part of the fair use analysis. If I'm criticizing or commenting on a work like a book by a former president, I can copy it in order to criticize and comment on it. Constitutional right there. But the Post, having copied 2 paragraphs of the book into the review that was published in the newspaper, was nonetheless found guilty of copyright infringement, or found liable for copyright infringement, because the 2 paragraphs that they copied were the paragraphs where President Ford discussed his reasoning for pardoning President Nixon in the wake of the Watergate scandal. And the judge basically ruled that those were the only 2 paragraphs that anyone would have any reasonable interest in reading about the life of President Ford. And therefore, by copying those 2 paragraphs, the Washington Post had copied the heart of the work. And that's the standard today, folks. Okay, if you copy a piece of something, have you copied the heart? And I don't know if I can tell you what the heart of any work is, but the court decided it in that case. So the question is, if you summarize the book by Sarah Silverman in your AI, are you committing a copyright infringement? It's kind of hard to see my way clear to that being an infringement, but I think her case lies mostly on the issue of the fact that the book was copied originally without permission, that she hasn't published her book on the internet, and that if it was found on the internet, it was placed there without her authorization, so that they're taking a bootleg copy, integrating into their database, and therefore reducing the being able to summarize it to the public. So we'll have to see how this case plays out, because this is going to make some interesting law as well. And finally, of course, there was the
Brent?
Yeah.
Hey, Brent, there's a question I think fits perfectly here.
Okay.
And the question is from Kevin Lineman. He says, why would the user of AI content be held responsible for infringement and not the AI system itself who went out and procured and provided the infringing content?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you'll notice that the defendants in both of these cases are in fact OpenAI and Microsoft, the providers of the AI engines themselves. However, they're the ones that did the original copying, but the creation of the new work is another act as well. Okay, so I don't believe that it is out of bounds for, at some point, depending on who the user is and how much trouble they're causing, how many copies of the original work they're depriving the sale, right? Things like that. I mean, I can see that the case may come against the user at some point, and we're going to talk about that in a few slides as well. So it's an excellent point, but as you can see in these cases, they're suing the database providers. This is another case against the provider, against Stability AI. This is the Getty Images case, because as you can see in paragraph 1, this case arises from Stability AI's brazen infringement of Getty Images' intellectual property on a staggering scale. Stability AI has copied more than 12 million photographs from Getty Images' collection. So so one of the things in copyright that you can ask for as a plaintiff is what are called statutory damages. If you don't know how much you've been damaged, you can say, well, I've been damaged, judge, so let's just pick a number between $500 and $100,000. And so if this case goes to trial and they get statutory damages and they get $100,000 per infringing copy, then it's going to be a multiple trillion dollar case, which is likely to put Stability AI out of business. So it's really huge. Now, and the thing about this case is, if you look at Stability AI, and I don't have an example here, but I've seen several, and you should look it up. Some of the results of the Stability AI generative AI actually have the Getty Images watermark in the new generated picture. So definitely some unclean hands going on there. Let's talk about ownership, and then we'll conclude this whole copyright issue. I don't know if you guys recognize this dude, but this fellow stumbled across a camera in the jungle and picked it up and took a bunch of selfies, really good ones, as a matter of fact. And the guy who owned the camera saw these pictures and he submitted them to the Copyright Office to obtain his copyright registration. And the Copyright Office said, only humans can be authors. The Copyright Office in the United States has a very strict policy that the creator of a work cannot own it unless that creator is a human being, which means everything that's generated by the AI. Well, okay, so let's give you the bottom line. You can potentially be sued for everything you publish that was created by an AI, okay? Because you're taking an infringing copy and you're publishing it, and yes, they can go towards the database that helped you create that, but you in fact created it with your prompt, and you're the one putting it into use. And the reason I say publish is because that's how they find you. If you can create stuff all day long, but if you don't actually publish it or put it on your website or create a book or tell people about it, then they can't police that necessarily. So you don't get sued until you publish, okay? So there's going to be a case where somebody goes crazy, pulls a bunch of content from the generative AI, publishes it, maybe puts it in a movie, TV show, or an encyclopedia, who knows? And that user of the AI will probably get sued for copyright infringement. So you can get sued for everything. So you need to be mindful of this as you're generating pictures from Stable Diffusion or whatever, DALL-E, you're generating text from ChatGPT, GPT-4, etc. You need to understand that if somebody sees it and it smells bad to them and they think it's a copy or substantially similar to their original work, you might end up as a defendant in a copyright infringement suit, maybe alongside OpenAI or what have you, but maybe just lying solo, baby. And it will be worth your while to turn to OpenAI at that point and say, hey, you should indemnify me for this. You should defend this case for me because you're the one that gave me the gun that I used to shoot the thing. But the question as to whether or not they're going to indemnify you is a difficult one, because if you read the OpenAI terms of service on the free version, there's absolutely no indemnification language in there with respect to OpenAI indemnifying you. In fact, it's the opposite. Their terms of service has you, the user, indemnifying OpenAI for any claims that are brought against it based on what you do or publish. So again, you can potentially be sued for everything you publish that was created by an AI, but you do not own it yourself. And everyone else can copy it from you and use it too, and potentially get themselves sued. Okay, so that's the thing about the AIs, because a human didn't create it, it's not ownable. Now, if you get in and edit it and you play with it and you add some human originality and creativity, yes, now you're transferring it from something that's just plain old AI content to human authorship, and then you can get a copyright and you can own it. But you can still be sued for it because it's still potentially based on somebody else's work. Okay. Oh my God, seriously? Yes, seriously. This is true. You can get sued for stuff that you don't own. All right. That's the big gotcha with copyright right now. And we don't know. We just don't know how these cases are going to play out. I've been practicing copyright law for well over 30 years now. And I can't predict how these cases are going to come out. This is new. It's possible we're going to need some legislation. I doubt it. The copyright statute's pretty robust and has dealt with a bunch of things in the past, including the internet. But I think we're all very much in a wait and see approach to how these cases are going to get resolved. And of course, the wheels of justice turn frustratingly slowly. So we don't expect tons of results for a few months now. There are lots of other lawsuits. There are lots of people bringing lawsuits based on libel, slander, hallucinations. When the AI makes up a fact, we tend to call it a hallucination. I find that to be a bit anthropomorphic, and I'd rather call them, lies or mistakes or something that's not quite so human sounding, but we call them hallucinations. And people are getting sued for publishing things that aren't true about other people because the AI makes stuff up. There are people bringing lawsuits against the AI because of the invasion of privacy, because they found some publicly available document that reveals some sensitive facts about the person that should have been kept private. And there are people bringing lawsuits basically claiming that AI is going to bring the downfall of civilization and we should stop it and we should regulate it. And this is true. There are some cases out there and you can go find them. And again, we don't know how many of these are going to play out. And so again, my conservative advice to you as your lawyer is be careful, wait and see, because there are no bright lines. I don't know what the speed limit is. I don't know that it's 55 or 65 or 80 yet on the AI freeway. All right. One other thing, a couple things to be careful about is confidentiality. Everything you type into the free version of the AI is no longer confidential. It goes to, at very least, to the company that runs the AI. Now, that's not necessarily true on the paid versions, and you got to be careful, and you got to read the terms of service, which is actually the next slide, the next concept. But for the most part, everything you type into the free version of all of these AIs is going to be shared with the company that's running the AI. I'm seeing an interesting question by Robert Cost. Can Maya Angelou sue Brent for the example used in this presentation, even if no copy was ever made, but merely a work in the style of? And I'm pretty confident to say, Bob, that the answer there is no. You can always do stuff in the style of somebody else, as long as you're not rising to the level of adopting their persona without authority. We're all familiar, we lawyers anyway, intellectual property lawyers are familiar with the case of the theft of persona case of Vanna White, the famous letter turner on the Wheel of Fortune. Samsung produced a commercial back in the early 80s where it was the Wheel of Fortune of the future, and Vanna White was represented as a robot with a blonde wig, basically a toaster with a blonde wig, and she sued Samsung and won for theft of persona, because the court ruled that everybody knows that that's Vanna White and you can't use her image or her likeness without her permission. So you got to be careful, right? So potentially if you do something that's too close to somebody's style, for example, that video that we saw, if you took Tom Cruise and put him in that video, you would get sued for theft of persona, making him say things that he didn't actually say. So again, mind your confidentiality. There's a famous case of somebody putting in a bunch of trade secrets as a prompt to ChatGPT, and they basically breached their NDA with the person that owned those trade secrets. So don't do that. Remember that everything you share with the free version is potentially public. Review the terms of service. Don't use ChatGPT or DALL-E or any of these products in production without having your lawyer review the terms of service. And I mean it, you got to go to counsel for this, okay? Because we all understand words, and we can all read contracts, but we lawyers know what the words mean in certain circumstances. And I get that it's tedious and I get that it's BS, but we will tell you what the thing means and we'll tell you what the risks are. So find me or someone like me to review the terms of service of any AI tool that you're using in your business to let you know, do you own your prompts? Are your prompts confidential? Do you own the results that are produced? Does anyone own the results that are produced? Is it even ownable? Is it in the public domain? Do you have some obligation to license it back to the provider? All of this wonderful, juicy information can be found in the terms of service for all of these tools. And keeping an eye on the clock, I'm moving on to hallucinations. I mentioned this earlier, but this is a major risk in using any of these AI tools, is that they make stuff up. Okay, so let's take a look at one of the things that happened. Judge sanctions lawyers for brief written by AI with fake case citations. Okay, this guy said, hey, partner in my firm, write me a brief for this case about XYZ. And the partner said, sure, will do, pal. And he had ChatGPT write the brief. And it had all sorts of meaningful case citations, because that's what we do when we write a brief. We lawyers, is we cite precedent, we cite cases. Well, in the case of Smith versus Jones, which can be found in this book, the Federal Reporter, section 3, page 47, the judicial opinions right there for you to read, everybody. Well, they decided XYZ, and so you should decide XYZ in this case, Judge. And so the partner who wrote the brief, or had ChatGPT write the brief, gave it up to the partner who had to file it in court, didn't read it, didn't check it, didn't shepherdize it, didn't look to see if the cases were real or not, submitted it to the court, and then the judge read it and said, oh, that Smith versus Jones sounds like a pretty interesting case. I better go look that up. And the judge couldn't find it because it was fake, because the AI made up the case out of whole cloth. In fact, it made up every case in the brief. Cases did not exist. Imagine the ire that your average judge is going to feel, who probably knows very little about AI and is not at all inclined to excuse this kind of behavior, when he or she realizes that every case in the brief that was submitted to the bench is fake. And so this guy was fined $5,000 and promised never to do it again. Another risk. So my point is, you can't believe everything the AI tells you. And look, I have a client in the automotive space, which is putting up a little AI to talk to customers who come to the website to buy the cars. And every now and then it says, yeah, you can get this little beauty for $10,000. And it's just not true. It just makes it up. And it's very difficult to control. And the engineers who are using these tools have to jump through significant hoops to make them tell the truth. And so if you're just casually pulling content out of ChatGPT or any other of these tools, you need to be extremely careful, okay? Because it will make stuff up. Also, bias. Another risk of AI today is the bias issue, which is, sorry, let me do this, which is that, the data that it was based on is going to contain inherent bias. Again, I don't care how woke you are or not. The fact of the matter is that human generated content has bias, it has perspective, it has opinion, it has position. And those biases are going to be promulgated throughout the data as it is interpreted, because again, there's no intelligence here. It's just autocomplete on steroids. So the question is, as I understand the case above, when the situation was researched, AI actually defended its erroneous case content. Yes, that's right. You went back and said, hey, why did you make these cases up? And it lied and said I didn't. Yeah, that's correct. Okay, here's some more examples. What I asked ChatGPT, what's the deal with bias in artificial intelligence large language models? And it gave me an answer, because it has answers, but here they are. I summarized them a moment ago, and I'm skipping over this. I'm not going to read it because in the interest of time. But there are numerous bias issues with respect to the data that exists on the internet as translated through the AI. So be careful there. What is the solution to all these problems? The solution to all these problems is to have an AI policy. We at CoreX Legal write them routinely. I'm not trying to pitch you here, but I'm just saying you ought to think through this, and you ought to have an internal policy in your company about the use of AI. What are some of the provisions? Well, yeah, purpose and scope, fine. Ethical guidelines, you need to talk about ethics. These slides will be made available to you, and so will the recording, so I'm not going to read all these. You can do them yourself. You need to talk about data privacy and security. You need to talk about legal compliance, responsible AI development. The list goes on and on. You need to have these items in your internal privacy AI policy, and everyone in your company needs to know them and stick to them, because if you don't, then you're going to create stuff that's going to get you in trouble. Also, I want to recommend that you go to the FTC, the United States Federal Trade Commission. They have some great guidance on the use of AI in your business, which is very similar to the guidance I just gave you on that enumerated list. So I want to conclude by saying that there are lots of things that the AI can do, and it's quite miraculous. And the legal issues are myriad and difficult. Now, one of the things the AI has historically had trouble with is really human things like humor. I asked ChatGPT 6 months ago, I said, compose an original bespoke joke in the style of Jerry Seinfeld's observational humor. And this is what I got. Did you ever notice that A is the first letter and Z is the last letter, but you can never find A? So that's a fail, right? By any standard. That's not a joke. It's not very funny. It's not even true. It made me laugh. And it made me predict that the AI wasn't intelligent and couldn't really pass the Turing test yet because it doesn't get humor. So I don't know what they've been doing over there, but I asked ChatGPT the same question this morning, and I got better answers. I'll read the bottom one. And what's with airplane food? It's like they've got a secret contest going on up there. Hey, let's see how tiny we can make these pretzels. I mean, I've seen breadcrumbs bigger than those things. I almost had to bring a magnifying glass just to find them. So, okay, not hilarious, but if you imagine Jerry Seinfeld doing that, hey, what's the deal with airplanes? Right? I mean, it takes on, so it's getting better. The humor's getting better. I asked Google Bard this morning, same question. Got a pretty decent joke about when you get a big plate and a small steak, and it's happened to all of us. So it's getting a little better. There were actually some headlines this morning that suggested that ChatGPT and Bard and a couple others were actually getting stupider, that over the months they've become less competent at answering questions properly, and no one can yet explain why that's happening. I've seen no suggestions that it's necessarily sabotage. It might be something inherent in the large language model, sort of learning from itself. There's definitely a concept of the information becoming flat. If you remember cassette tapes, you remember that An analog copy is very imperfect. You copy a cassette tape 2 or 3 times, and it gets very muddy. It gets very imprecise, and you lose your highs and you lose your lows, as opposed to a digital copy. Well, it turns out that when these large language models are trained on their own results, which are starting to become part of the internet now, so to the extent they're still reading, they're reading their own output, and it's beginning to dull the experience, and it's beginning to dull the results. So yes, digital inbreeding has its consequences. That's exactly right. The snake eats its own tail. Okay, finally, in conclusion, what I asked, draw things. I said, draw a lawyer tired and shagged out after giving a long presentation, enjoying a glass of wine and reading a good book, as in the style of a painting, in the style of Salvador Dali. And I got this, which is, you know, pretty good. It's very Dali-ish. I don't know what that foot is in his groin. And I don't really see a wine glass, but I do kind of see what looks like an image of Dali. So that's, I see a comment here, Midjourney has changed dramatically from v5.1 to v5.2. In fact, there are new biases introduced. Not surprised by that at all. It's difficult to cleanse your data from bias. So, okay, so here it is, folks. It's here. It's crazy. It's a whole new era. It's a whole new step in the history of humankind. It's only going to get better. It's going to get better faster and faster and faster. And it's going to approach obvious Turing test passage in the very near future. And one final note, I would say that I have to leave you with this. In about 5 minutes, there's a non-zero chance that AI will become an existential threat to human civilization. Thank you. Have a nice day. And that concludes my remarks on AI and the law.
Hey, Brent.
Yeah.
There's one question in here from Miranda who said, what exposure do businesses and the owners of the businesses have on for liability if an employee uses ChatGPT without permission, but they don't have a policy? So for example, with the law firm, the employee did it.
Yeah. Okay. So just as a general rule, the owners of a business are not personally liable for the harms caused by the business. There are some exceptions, especially if the owners were personally involved in causing the harms. But for the most part, that's why we form companies, is so that the owners of the company are not personally liable for the harms caused by the business. But the business is definitely liable for the harms caused by the business. And the question would turn on, did the employee commit the copyright infringement during the scope of employment, using the employee's tools, under the employee's direction, under the company's direction, while he or she was on the job, basically. And if the answer is, well, yeah, it went out in a company newsletter or it went out in a company's product, then yeah, the company is vicariously liable for the acts of the employee. In fact, the employee probably wouldn't even be personally liable, might lose his or her job because the employer is the one that's going to get sued because they have the deep pocket. So yes, now, if you have a policy, it's just like with sexual harassment, okay? Somebody complains about somebody else's behavior, you have a policy, you follow the policy, and you conduct an investigation, you figure out what happened. That can be very good for you in court when you eventually get sued, because you can say, Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we followed the policy and we found there was no harassment, okay? Same thing with AI. One of the items in the AI policy that I went through very quickly a moment ago was crisis response. What happens when there's a problem, when there's a breach? You have to have a process for understanding what's happened, retrieving what's been published if possible, and that can look good later if the company is sued. That the company said, yeah, look, we had a policy, we had a breach, we tried to fix it, it was unauthorized, we did our best. Yeah, maybe you don't get sued as bad, or maybe you don't pay as much money as you would if you didn't have a policy, because having the policy shows that you care about the misuse of AI in your company. So great question. You're welcome.
Any other
questions? I've got 2 minutes here.
Yeah, feel free to unmute if you've got a question to ask Brent directly.
By the way, the beaver is the MIT mascot, the beaver being nature's engineer, the way they cut down their trees and build their dams. And that's why we have a beaver surfing on the screen right now, because I've always fancied myself a surfer. Oh. All right, hearing no questions, I'm prepared to say thank you all very much. I feel as though when you speak publicly before an audience, you owe them education, if not entertainment. And I hope you've both been educated and entertained. And feel free to email me anytime with any follow-up questions that you may have. My email is on the screen, bcjb@corexlegal.com. More than happy to entertain any questions and help you out off the clock as best we can here at CoreX Legal. So once again, Jeff, unless you have any concluding
No,
remarks.
just a reminder, just a follow-up. Thanks for being here. We'll be sending out the recording and the slides. If you have follow-up questions, we'll also include in that Brent's contact information and mine. Make a note on your calendar. The next webinar is Thursday, August 10th, same time, perhaps a different Zoom station. And that will be on the topic of raising money for your venture. And also look for the follow-up survey of just a couple of questions. Thanks everybody for being here, and keep an eye out for the AI. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.